Let's start chapter 17, and this is on page 464 in your textbook. I'm looking over this chapter, and it's a big one, and there's a lot of information to pass along. I'll try to cut this up into as small a number of videos as possible, but a lot of work to do. We got to go quick on these, so you'll probably have a short little video to watch every single day. We'll see how that works out when we get back from the break. Anyway, you can tell probably from this video that I'm making this way before spring break and you'll be watching it way after. That's okay. That's the beauty of doing these videos this way. Let's start chapter 17. Time to get rolling in chapter 17. Human health and environmental risks. This is where scientists kind of put together all of the stuff that you've been learning about so far, chemical-wise and disease-wise, and put it together in terms of how it affects humans, not just ecosystems or individual organisms. And there's a section here at the end of the chapter about environmental risks. So we need to get into that. I think I will lecture that last part of the chapter rather than make a video. Alright, so we're on page 464 in your textbook, and here it goes. Basically, we can categorize human health risks into three different types, and we will cover each of them. Physical risks are those things that you encounter in your daily life that can physically harm you. For instance, when you get in a car and you drive, you run the physical risk of a crash. When you cross the street, you run the physical risk of getting hit by a car. Biological risks, of course, are those things that are disease-oriented, disease etiologies. So there are some things that you can do to avoid biological risk because you know what the etiology of the disease is, so you can stay away from it. Chemical risks are those risks, and they're all about exposure. Sometimes you can control it, sometimes you can't. Those people in Bhopal, India, that you learned about previously, they had no control over their exposure to very bad chemicals that caused severe human health tragedies. So those are the three, and we're going to go through each one. And we're going to hit here with diseases first. You probably know this, so I shouldn't take too long. Everybody understand the difference between a chronic and an acute disease? Think about it in your mind. Can you answer that question? Can you answer it when you come to class tomorrow? That's going to be the interesting question. Alright, so chronic diseases are diseases that occur over a long period of time. Acute diseases are short in duration and can usually be more dangerous, more harmful. Chronic diseases over the long haul. And of course, you're all familiar with infectious disease. That's a disease that you can catch from either another person or perhaps an organism. This pie chart here shows you the leading causes of death in the world. And we'll talk about them in subsequent slides coming up here. But you can see that our big problem all around the world, the number one killer is cardiovascular disease, mostly from being overweight, things along those lines. So that's either your arteries, your veins, or your heart muscle itself. And then things get quite a bit smaller after that. Cancers, 13%. Not much you can do about cancer, except we all know that there are behaviors that you can avoid, and that will help you decrease your likelihood of a cancer. Doesn't mean you won't get a cancer, it just decreases the likelihood. Respiratory and digestive diseases, only 10% if you get injured. Giving birth, 5% of the deaths in the world are from giving birth. 8% is from everything else. And then here's the one I want to talk about now. Infectious diseases is number 2 on the hit parade. That's diseases that we catch. Now here in the United States, we're pretty good about protecting ourselves from infectious diseases, but here they are. And you can see they're spread over a wide variety of types. Respiratory infections, because it's so easy to catch an infectious disease through your lungs, and that organism can seat itself in your lungs. Respiratory infections are 30% of all of the infectious disease deaths around the world. AIDS still up there, although we are getting control of the AIDS epidemic. Diarrhea, all those gastrointestinal diseases that cause you dehydration. Tuberculosis is a disease that we thought we had in check in the United States. We are seeing a slight rise in tuberculosis. That is just a bacterial infection in the lungs. Malaria, I'm going to cover malaria here in a minute. All the childhood diseases are sort of lumped together at 8%, and then we've got 6% here. Here are the risk factors as determined by the WHO. This is an acronym that you need to recognize. The WHO is the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization keeps track of all of the deaths all around the world to try to figure out where the big risk factors are. And for LEDCs, you can see that their number one problem, well, actually, they don't have one big number one problem, do they? They have a variety of them. Each one of them is pretty low. I mean, this high cholesterol one here isn't even half. It's more than half of what the number one is. So that helps you to analyze this graph and see, well, there's not one that really jumps out at you. But low weight during childhood is a big risk factor. In other words, that's going to lead to death sooner in people, and that is an LEDC problem, of course. A lot of people in the LEDCs, a lot of kids are malnourished or at least undernourished. So low birth rate, weight. High blood pressure. There's not a lot of safe sex activity in the Congo. There's no protected sex. Unsafe sex, unsafe water, unsafe hygiene, high sugar levels, in other words, diabetes. Their smoke is not from tobacco use as much as it's a problem from being indoors and using it to heat their hut. Tobacco use is here, though, and you get the other one. So these are small percentages overall. But let's take a look at MEDCs. This is where we live, and you can see some big leaders. If you use tobacco, it's the number one risk factor for causing chronic diseases like emphysema. Tobacco use even leads to high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, doesn't matter the cause, it leads to a lot of other chronic problems. And then things tend to decrease. So, when you analyze this graph, you say, wow, there's two really big ones right at the top. We need to focus in on those. And then there's 4 in the middle that are pretty much the same. And looky here, almost all of these have something to do with food, eating, exercise, stuff like that. And then these last 4 are probably ones we wouldn't worry too much about. Low fruit or vegetable intake, it's a problem, but not a great big problem. Outdoor urban air pollution, we talked about that. Photochemical smog we're talking about here. Alcohol use and occupational risks. So you can see big difference between the risk factors for an LEDC and an MEDC. And this is what makes it harder for us to put together a worldwide strategy to deal with problems. But the fact that some of these are on both charts, high blood pressure is number 2 on both charts, means this is an area that we can really concentrate on. We've got to find ways to help both the poor countries and the rich countries to control their blood pressure. And you've probably already all been taught about ways that you can do that. It's a concern. This shows you deaths, annual deaths in the United States and accidents. Number 3, but the 2, again, if you analyze this graphic, there's 2 huge ones, being overweight and using tobacco. So, if you can avoid these 2 things, you really decrease the cause of deaths in the United States. But after we deal with those two, we have accidents at 3. Only about half, more like 40% of the accidents that happen are car accidents. So these are accidents at home, fall off a ladder, things like that. Alcohol use quite a bit higher in this statistical analysis for the U.S. as opposed to all MEDCs. And that should not surprise you. It seems that as a culture, we abuse alcohol way more than the other MEDCs do. Because they have alcohol in their daily lives, they don't seem to abuse it as much. And then on and on. Suicides actually higher than homicides, surprisingly. Illegal drug use, these deaths will continue to rise. But in the grand scheme of things in the United States, not a lot of people use drugs, so there's not a lot of deaths from illegal drug use. However, it has made the list, hasn't it? And then here's worldwide. And again, poverty, malnutrition, disease cycle. Number 1 by a bunch. I mean, number 2 isn't even half of what number 1 is. So now you can see what we'd like to do. If you're a doctor and you're trying to think of ways to help the world, you can try to deal with poverty and malnutrition and try to deal with tobacco usage. These other diseases, they're on the list. They're big time. But by far, the largest deaths worldwide, poverty, malnutrition. All right, let's talk about infectious diseases and the numbers of people that have been killed. There are a wide variety of diseases to cover in this section, and it's probably a video all in and of itself. So I'm going to stop this video now. I'm promising you shorter videos, and you can pick this one up tomorrow with infectious diseases. Bye for now.